Right then, hello and welcome back once again to the channel. I am here in some unfamiliar surroundings. It's a house I'm going to be living in for the next 12 months or so. And I'm here with another shoe review. I am really excited about this one. It's an orange box, so we all know what that is. And here we have the Vaporfly Next Percent 2. Let's get into it. Right, so this is a shoe that I have been really excited to get my hands on, and full disclosure up front, Nike have sent me this pair to test out. They are not going to preview any of the content I put out there. I am under no obligations when it comes down to what I say about the shoe. So with the disclosures out of the way, let's get into it. So first and foremost, I have been a huge fan of the Vaporfly Next Percent since picking up my first pair, which was the Pink Blast colorway back in, I think it was November 2019. All of a sudden I started breaking PBs left, right and centre. And funnily enough, I was breaking those PBs by between 4.5% and 5%, which tied in quite nicely with the name. But yes, 5k PBs, 10k PBs and half marathon PBs were all set in that shoe. Now Nike then brought out the Alphafly last year in 2020, and as we headed in towards 2021, images of the Vaporfly Next Percent 2 started to emerge online. And now here we have it. So it was released a couple of weeks ago. There was an initial surprise drop online. Some users of the Nike Run Club app got early access to it in a prototype colorway, and then the wider audience were given access to it in the Nike app and other online retailers. Frustratingly, when it came to release day, Nike didn't have any UK 13s on their website. I did try and get it. As it happened, I had a 25% birthday discount code that I was desperate to use on them. But yes, in both the Aurora green colorway that we've got here and the more recent white colorway, they just didn't drop in a 13 at all. As it happens, I was then sent a pair to try out, so it was a happy ending in the end. So as always with my reviews, what I'm not going to do is to get into loads of technical specifications to do with the midsole, to do with stack height, to do with drop, to do with all of that sort of stuff. So what's important to me when it comes down to the shoe is how they look and feel, how they feel during that first on-foot experience and walking around, and then how they feel during the first run. I'll follow up perhaps in a few weeks' time once I've got some more miles in the shoe, but this is really unboxing and initial impressions. So let's get into it, and the first thing that you notice when you open the box is the colorway of this shoe. Now let's just double check what it's called. So it's called Aurora Green and Black. So it's a sort of turquoisey colour in the majority of the upper with a black swoosh on the side and around the front there, a little bit of black detail around the back and in the midsole and the midsole here. And then you've got this sort of mid blue around the toe box and the upper side of the midsole in the forefoot area there. The majority of the midsole is this off-white of the Zoom X foam, and on the outsole you've got black rubber there and a turquoise swoosh towards the back of the heel. The laces are turquoise to match the upper, and they're actually a ribbed lace as well, so similar to what we saw in the Alphafly Next Percent. And I loved those laces on the Alphafly. They almost acted like lock laces. The earlier versions of the Vaporfly Next Percent, which we'll come on to in a moment, had just sort of smoother laces, which there was potentially a risk of those coming loose during the run. I didn't really experience myself, but yes, perhaps one or two people did report that. So these laces are a little bit ribbed around the edges. I'll bring them in close so you can have a look. And what that does is it just gives a little bit more of a secure fit. So the main difference when it comes to comparing the Vaporfly Next Percent 2 to the Vaporfly Next Percent, so the version that was released back in 2019, is the upper. When it comes to the midsole, the Zoom X foam and the carbon fibre plate, which runs throughout that, that's all the same. It's this mesh upper that they've changed from the old Vaporweave upper of the Next Percent. And I've got a pair of the Next Percent here, and for me, one thing that I found is in the Vaporweave upper, it's sort of a smooth material, I found that quite restrictive on my feet, and what I'm hoping with this that I've heard from initial reports is it has a little bit more flexibility, the mesh gives a little bit more breathability, and it's a little bit more roomy as well. Now I have a size UK 13 feet, which are quite large, and they also expand even further when I run, which often makes it difficult for racing shoes that are quite restrictive. They become uncomfortable during the run. So I'm interested to see and look forward to trying these out over perhaps some slightly longer distances to see how that feels, that extra bit of space. And even just looking actually side by side, I'm digressing slightly, I know, from the upper, but even just looking side by side, the profile of the Next Percent seems to be lower than the profile of the Next Percent 2. So even by sight, there looks to be more space in this one, but we'll come on to that once I get them onto my feet. So yes, just ditching those for a moment. And back to this one. So what characteristics have we got? I've already covered the laces, but when it comes to the lacing system, it's off-centered lacing, so that's supposed to take away some of the pressure across the middle of your foot by being off-center there. You've got eyelets up the side, and then you've got a double eyelet at the top, which is ideal for applying the runner's knot, which, as I've said in all of my videos I think ever recorded, if I have the option to do the runner's knot, then I will do so. It is by far, in my opinion, and the opinion of many other people, the best way of getting a really nice, secure, locked-in feeling to your shoes without over-tightening and causing pressure points across the top of your feet. I will put a link to an instructional video on how to do the runner's knot somewhere up here, so if you're not familiar with it, then check that video out. Try the runner's knot, it will change your life. So that covers off the laces. Now let's go around the rest of the midsole. As I've said, the material is a mesh material. Let's just get rid of that for a bit of weight reduction. As I've said, it's a mesh material. It doesn't have a great amount of flexibility in it, but what it lacks in flexibility, it gains in that additional space. One thing that's immediately noticeable is it looks like a really breathable material. So there are lots of perforations, lots of holes throughout that. Let's bring it right in close so you can hopefully see a little better. So around all of the upper, you've got a lot of airflow, so that's going to be great, particularly as your feet start to get a bit sweaty in the run. That's going to allow that airflow to help to cool the feet down. Around the front of the toe box, there's a slightly reinforced element here where the mesh is almost coated in this rubbery, it's not hard, but there's an ever so slight rubbery texture to that, which is different from the mesh of the remainder of the upper. Just coming in to around the heel, and you've got a cushioned heel counter. Now let's compare that to the old version. Yeah, it's pretty similar there. You've got a bit of a cushioned heel support, which is going to add a little bit of stability, a little bit of security around the Achilles and your heel there. The back of the shoe is reinforced around the heel. It's all pretty flexible across the remainder of the shoe. If I just squish it from above, actually you can see the additional rigidity around the toe box and additional around the back if I just push down. So that's immediately apparent. When it comes to the tongue, it's not attached anywhere inside, it's fairly loose, other than having the laces running through a loop in the middle there. Now, one thing that I did find in the Vaporfly Next Percent is when slipping them on, sometimes the tongue would slide to one side or the other. It can be a little bit of an inconvenience having to straighten that out before you tie the laces, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over that whatsoever. There's a little bit of padding in the tongue. I'm just going to again compare that to the Vaporfly Next Percent, in which there was no padding at all. So perhaps that's going to give a little bit of additional comfort on the top of the foot. I mean, it's really, really minor, but you can feel it if you give the tongue a bit of a squeeze. Now the midsole is Zoom X foam, which is Nike's racing foam. It is super lightweight, it is super bouncy, it is super responsive. And if you are looking at the shoe, it's the thing that's immediately noticeable is just how crazy it looks. Now I talk many times about how I love crazy looking shoes, and these are certainly that. Now running throughout the midsole is a full length carbon fiber plate, and that's where you get that massive amount of energy return, giving the shoe a bit of a squeeze there, and it is really, really rigid. And that's where you find, as you transition towards your toe off, you're getting propelled forward into the next step. And it's a really crazy feeling, and the only thing that I can do to try and describe how that transition from landing to toe off feels is to use a spoon. So if you consider transitioning your weight from a landing point and you're transitioning towards toe off, and as you move your weight towards the front of the shoe, you're being propelled forward. As you move your weight to the spoony end of the spoon, you're being propelled forward into that toe off and into the next step. And that's sort of how it feels when you run in the Vaporfly Next Percent. It's insane. Now, I'm not expecting the Next Percent 2 to feel any different when it comes to that toe off. And when it comes to the outsole of the shoe, you've got a coverage of rubber towards the front of the shoe there. It's quite a thin layer of rubber before you then hit the Zoom X foam. You also have an exposed Zoom X midsole there, but a little bit of rubber traction around each side of the rear of the heel there as well. Now, the thing about Zoom X is once it starts to come into contact with the ground, it starts to wear away pretty quickly. And what I experienced in my first pair of Vaporfly Next Percent, just grab those from here, is that outsole wore through pretty quickly. I have a tendency to scuff the lateral side of my foot as I come into land, and I wore through that rubber pretty quickly, hit the Zoom X foam. No sooner had I hit the Zoom X foam than I start to wear straight through to the carbon fiber plate. So if I just bring this in close so you can take a look at that, you can see the damage that I did on that Zoom X foam as it started to come into contact with the ground. Now, just bringing the other shoe in as well, actually, so you can see on the left shoe, same problem. Now, this is an issue that I'd had historically. I've been working quite hard to correct that, and I'm glad to say that if you look at my Valerian blue pair, I haven't worn through them, and I can't remember, I've probably got 100 miles or so on that pair. So yes, Zoom X, for all it is a fantastic lightweight and bouncy material, it is quite fragile as well. Now, when it comes to longevity, in my pink pair, I think I've done around about 350 to 400 kilometers, which is not a great deal really when you consider that the cost of the shoe is £240. Having said that, I've seen people that have run up to 1,000 kilometers in them. So if your running form is spot on and perfect, then that won't cause an issue. What I found is because of my form and the scuffing of the outsole, they wore down pretty quickly. And now if I do try to run in the pink pair, the carbon fiber plate, you can feel it and hear it scratching on the floor, which is not only an annoying noise, but that instability where the hole in the outsole is has potential to cause a risk of an injury. So yes, same outsole, same thickness, and hopefully since I've corrected that form issue that I've got, I will see many more miles in this pair than I did in the pink pair that I had first. Right, so without further ado, I'm going to slip these on and see how they feel on foot. So that slipped on fairly easily, and just as I mentioned earlier, I've just got that bit of an issue with the tongue sliding around a bit. I've got to adjust and sort of pull to correct for that. Just going to give it a little bit of a tighten throughout. What I've already done is to apply the runner's knot. So just by putting those loops in the laces using the top two eyelets, that means is they are primed and ready to run. It doesn't leave a lot of space at the end of the laces, so you can only really get a single knot, but a single knot is sufficient when you've got the runner's knot applied. It is unlikely that your shoe is going to come loose. And the first thing, even before I stand up, the first thing that I can feel is there feels to be a lot more space around the upper, and actually I'm quite surprised how much space is in the toe box. So at the end of my big toe, there is around about a thumbnail's width, maybe slightly more so. And then around the rest of my toes, there's probably more space. Although that's the same size, UK 13, as my other Vaporfly Next Percent, there seems to be a bit more space there in the toe box. And that's perhaps similar to the Alphafly Next Percent. So the upper being material, a mesh kind of material, just grabbing a pair of Alphafly, there's one that I prepared earlier, I've found in the Vaporfly Next that I've got much more space in and around the toe box than I do in the Vaporfly Next with the Vapor Weave upper. And actually, as it happens, this pair of Vaporfly are in a UK 13, and there's a lot of extra space. I do have another pair of Vaporfly Next where I opted for a UK 12, and they seem to fit a little bit more true to size, like a lot of my UK 13 shoes. So yeah, perhaps I would have got away with a pair of UK 12s in these, but like I said in the intro, I do have a tendency for my feet to swell slightly when I'm running, and so I'm always feeling a little bit happier having that little bit of extra space in the toe box, so I'm happy with these. Right, so just walking around, and I don't have quite as much space as I used to have walking up and down in this kitchen, but just feeling them on the hard floor, and it's a very familiar feeling underfoot. Having ran so many miles in the Vaporfly Next the midsole and everything underfoot feels very familiar when you slip on at the Next too. What feels a little bit different is that extra space in the toe box and around the upper of the shoe. So I almost feel as though there's a gap between where my foot is sitting and where the material is sitting over the top of it. And that's really around about this area. And you can see, actually, where I push down there is a little bit of airflow in between my foot and the material of the shoe. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a negative, but around the lace area and the collar and around the heel, I'm feeling really locked in. I'm just feeling as though there's a little bit of more opened up towards the front of the shoe. Again, not necessarily a bad thing. Just pushing down on the heel of the shoe, and that Zoom X foam, it's that super soft feeling midsole, and it feels great. It's a really cool material, and it's been applied recently in the Nike Zoom X Invincible Run Flyknit as well, which is a little bit of a mouthful to say. I did a review of that a couple of weeks ago as an easy day shoe. The one downside to the Zoom X is it's quite unstable because of that squishiness. If you lean off to one side or the other, it can become a little bit unstable, particularly with the stack height of the Vaporfly and how thin the shoe is towards the rear, just grabbing this original version. So if you look there at how thin that is, if you are landing anywhere other than sort of mid to forefoot, then you haven't got a lot of platform there to be landing on to provide a great deal of stability. These are not an everyday shoe, these are a race shoe. And so they're not something that I would be expecting to be bagging loads and loads of miles in anyway, and therefore putting myself at higher risk of causing injury by rolling an ankle or stuff like that. But yes, very squishy, very lightweight and very responsive material. Right, now that's probably around about as much as I can say just by bouncing up and down in the kitchen. So what I'm going to do is to lay these out with the rest of my kit and take them out for a spin tomorrow for the first impressions during that first run. I look forward to seeing you then. Right, so here we are then, and let's get this done. We're off. Okay, so we've just ticked off the first 2 kilometers, and it's a very familiar feeling. So for those that haven't run in the Vaporfly Next before, what I mean by that is there's this sort of firm-ish landing, but with enough cushion from that Zoom X foam just to take the edge off that impact. But then after each strike, you're sort of being pushed forward into the next toe from that carbon fibre plate. So I'm sort of sitting around about 4 minutes and 45 a kilometre, which is a nice sort of steady pace. And this shoe just wants to pick up that pace. It's not a shoe that likes to run slow. It wants you to be running fast, but it's a racing shoe, so that's absolutely to be expected. Right, so that's kilometre 3, just ticked off a little under 5 minutes, so just slowed the pace a little bit. I'm also taking on a bit of an incline, may not look like it. So I've recently moved house and I don't have my usual route through Newcastle Racecourse with that steep hill, but what I do have is this long, steady incline, which has taken it out of me a little bit. I'm still a bit unfit after coming back from injury. What I'm looking forward to is running back down this road and picking the pace up a little bit.
But yes, the shoe is nice and light, so there are no issues picking it up and putting it back down with each step. It's not feeling laborious as I'm going uphill, taking on a couple of little twists and turns. It's pretty much dry out here today. There was a little bit of rain a little earlier on, but the road has all but dried up now anyway. There's not a large amount of grip on that outsole, so I wouldn't really want to be taking it out on a super wet day. But for these sorts of conditions on the road, they feel ideal. Now, something I am enjoying is that bit of extra space in the upper towards the front of the foot. And some may prefer that tight, restricted, locked in feel of the Vaporfly Next Percent for racing, feeling like you're really securely held in place. But for me, I like my feet to be able to spread out a little bit. So because I've got quite wide feet, I feel the Vaporfly Next Percent with the Vapor Weave upper is just a little bit too restricted. Whereas the mesh upper on these is just giving me that little bit of extra wiggle room. I'm secure around the laces, but my feet are able to open up a bit towards the front. Right, so that is the first half of the run done. Time to turn it around, 5k. Time to turn it around and take the nice downhill route back home. Now, I wouldn't want to be a heel striker in these shoes, nor the Next Percent, the first Next Percent, or any of the other percents for that matter. The rear of the shoe, around the ankle, it doesn't have a very wide platform, and that Zoom X foam, being super squishy and super bouncy, doesn't offer a great deal of stability. It's not such a problem for me because I land mid to forefoot, and the platform towards the front of the shoe is nice and wide for landing. But anything behind the arch of the foot, and there's not a great surface area for landing, and I worry about rolling ankles, getting injuries and that sort of thing. Right, and I'm just allowing the pace to pick up ever so slightly, not towards race pace yet. I'm saving that for the 6k mark, which is in 200 meters time, but already the shoes are starting to respond. Let's give it another 100 meters and then we'll give it a push. Perhaps not for an entire kilometer, but maybe half a kilometer or so. I'm still struggling a little bit with injury, so I don't want to push too hard. But here we are, coming in for 6. That's it, let's push. Now immediately the shoes respond. They're like, all right, I see what you're doing here. Let's do this. Let's get this done. And they immediately start giving back all of the energy that you're putting in. It's that race day feeling. It's coming back to me. And races should be opening up soon. So I'm looking forward to towing the line. Right, we're running at 3:40 a kilometre. The shoes have picked up the pace nicely. They're holding the pace nicely. Let's pick it up a little later in the interval. And there we have 1 full kilometre actually. So time of 3 minutes and 27 seconds, which is surprising. I thought I was pushing it around about 3:40 a kilometre. And that just goes to show that the perceived effort in this shoe, the output, is often greater. So that was sort of 15 seconds per kilometre faster than I thought I was pushing. And it's the fastest kilometre I've run in quite some time actually, probably since January time, and we're now heading towards mid-April. So it felt great to pick up the pace again and start running at what hopefully one day will be my race pace. Just moving back over onto the road, the pavement is ever so slightly uneven. Now the one thing about this shoe is it's not overly forgiving if you roll your ankle in a pothole. And as it happens, back in January on a fast 5k in the Pink Blast Next Percent is when I rolled my ankle and got that injury on the outside of my left leg, which has had me out for 3 months. So yeah, be careful of your footing. Right, so what I'm going to do now is to put the camera away because it's getting a bit awkward to hold. I've got a about 3 kilometers or so left until I get home. I'm just going to enjoy the rest of the run and report back at the finish. Phew! Right, here we are coming in for the finish, and that is that then. So a little under 10 kilometers this morning, 9.99 kilometers to be exact. Now the reason that I've done that is because on Instagram people seem to go wild if I don't tick off the full 10k. So if you don't already follow me on Instagram, check me out at jamies.running. You'll have all sorts of crazy banter, like stopping your run 0.01 of a kilometer before everybody else would stop it. Okay, so we're not here to talk about that. So the Vaporfly Next Percent 2. In summary then, if you have already run in the Next Percent, this will be a really, really familiar feeling to you, albeit with that slightly different upper. Underfoot, that sort of firm but fair landing into the next turf, that fast feeling, the feeling of just wanting to push the pace, that all still exists in the Vaporfly Next Percent 2. The highlight for me has to be that upper and having the additional space around the front of the foot and particularly in the toe box. So I'm used to having sort of cramped toes in the Vaporfly Next Percent, feeling restricted, and I didn't have any of that in here. My toes were able to spread out a little bit. I've got wide feet, as I've said many times before, but these accommodated that very nicely, whilst still having a secure locked-in feel over the lacing area and the top of the foot. Again, I used the runner's knot to get that secure fit, so if you haven't already done so, then definitely check that out. All in all though, an absolutely fantastic shoe, and it reminded me of why the Vaporfly for a long time was my favourite running shoe. I think for anything up to a half marathon, it's going to be the Vaporfly Next Percent 2 that I'm going to be reaching for out of my rotation. Anything over that, or possibly for the half marathon, I might opt for the Alphafly Next Percent. Now the reason for that being, it's got the Zoom AirPods in the forefoot, which are just a little bit more forgiving as you're pounding the pavements for that little bit longer of a period. Overall though, fantastic shoe, and one that I would definitely recommend adding to your rotation. Thank you very much for watching. Comment, like, subscribe, all of that sort of great stuff, and share this video with your friends, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.